Hey gang, Scott here. We're coming into the home stretch on our mini-series about blending modes in ON1, ON1 Photo Raw, ON1 Effects. You have these things called blending modes, and they change the way that layers and filters interact with your photo. And they can be useful in certain scenarios, and that's the purpose of this series. If you haven't seen others in the series, check the show notes. There's a playlist down there that's going through all of the different things we've talked about blending modes. And go back to the intro video, I'll tell you what blending modes are in general. The purpose of this video is the exclusion blending mode. And this one it's like interesting / awkward. I don't really know how to describe what exclusion is doing without cracking open Google and starting to look at math and so forth. And if you watch the intro video, that's not what I'm interested in doing here. You know, exclusion does something about measuring things and excluding certain pixels, and it shows you a delta of things that are going on. The use case that I find it beneficial for is interesting color grading, and I'm going to show you that example here now. We'll use this photo. You've seen this photo elsewhere in the series. We can do color grading in a variety of ways in ON1. I'm running now ON1 Effects as a plugin, and I prefer to work in Effects when I can. And so one way we can do color grading is with a photo filter. We can use a photo filter with a color, and just for completeness, another way we can do is with a local. If you do a paint with color, and I'll flip my mask to be everything, you can do color grading in this way, and of course you'd need to really temper that down some. So you've got a couple of options here. I'm going to stick with the photo filter. Let's add that back to our stack. And as we see, we get this, this one's a default of blue and so forth here. If I go into my gear menu and I switch my mode to exclusion, this one's pretty wild, right? It's pretty strong. A lot of these exclusion modes, these modes that are farther down, tend to get pretty strong, and exclusion is one of them. So you're almost always going to be tempering, right? But here's where things get interesting. It's like, all right, I'm excluding, it's doing some stuff there. Let me open my color wheel, and I want to choose something like I like to sample a color that's already in the scene, and then start to amp it up. And what I usually find works well is you'll notice that the highlights are getting hit a lot more than the shadows. And that was even true for the default here. Let's reset. Go to exclusion. And you can see that as I tame that away and I push that up, it's the midtones and the highlights that are getting the most affected. Well, we have some options here, right? Let's get my green selected. Like I said, I like to choose something in the photo already. What if we also do some masking? If I say a luminosity mask and I invert it, now I'm protecting my highlights and I'm targeting my shadows. And now I've got something else kind of going on here, right? I want to choose an even darker green. Let's get deep on that, and then start inching this up. And this is giving a bit of a faded look. It's fading things out. I'm choosing this green here. Maybe it's because I watched this movie again recently, The Matrix. If you ever watched The Matrix, there's a lot of green toning in that photo. That's just how they've done that particular cinematic look. So maybe that's on my mind here. But this is some of the options we have available. But I do find that working with exclusion in combination with a luminosity mask, because again, by default, it's very heavy-handed on the highlights, so I tend not to want that. And the protection sliders are typically not enough. You try to protect the highlights. Yes, you'll do it, but you're really just not. It's kind of there, but it's kind of not. I prefer to do it with a lumen mask, invert, and if you need to feather things a little bit so you get some, here, I'll show you the view of that mask. You get some softness, right? This is the mask, so you can diffuse that color grading some with your masking controls, right? And then, play, try out different tones. And one of the nice things is you can bounce around here. If I make this very, very strong, very heavy, you can see the differences in the shift as I bounce around the color wheel. So you get to experiment with those color gradings pretty easily. And actually, as I'm playing around with the warmer tones, those are kind of interesting too. And before that change, after. With this photo, and like if you watch the previous video about vivid light, I think I like vivid light better for this scene, but you get the idea with exclusion as an option to do some color grading. It is probably the more esoteric of the blending modes, at least for my use. If you've got an interesting use for it, you're like, hey, Scott, forget about this one. Let me tell you about this other great use for exclusion. Drop it in the comments, because that's one of the reasons I do these series, is so we can all learn from each other together. So that's my story on the exclusion blend mode. I use it for color grading. You can do it with a color fill layer. You can do it with a local and paint with color. You can do it with a photo filter like you saw here, ON1 Effects or ON1 Photo Raw. Other questions, drop them below. And until next time, my name's Scott Davenport. Have fun.